Hey guys, Steve here from Coils and Coins Detecting. Welcome to another video. In this video I thought we might have a bit of a chat about beach detecting. Obviously detecting at the beach is a pretty popular place for most people to go, particularly when they're fairly new to detecting, but it's also a very interesting place to go for people who are quite experienced detectorists but haven't spent too much time at the beach yet. So what I thought I'd do for both beginners and advanced detectorists alike is go over such things as what areas of the beach to target, what kind of techniques you might use to increase your chances of finding good targets, what equipment and tools you might need as well, and other interesting tips and tricks along the way that I've found useful. Hopefully you find them useful too. Let's get into it. So the first place most people head on the beach when they're detecting is the dry sand, and that makes a lot of sense because it's very easy digging. Don't need a lot of specialised tools to detect on the dry sand. Places you might focus on to improve your chances would be entry and exit points, and that's because they're high traffic areas. Also places where people put their towels and their chairs and their shade, and that might require a little bit of research. Thing to do there is to head down to the beach on a busy day and see where people tend to congregate. You'll find there are certain areas where people definitely prefer to head and where most of the activity will be, and these are places you want to go to. So throughout this video I'm going to give you guys a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that hopefully will help you guys out. So the first tip I want to suggest here is to dig sketchy signals. By that I mean if you get a signal that's not 100% repeatable, or the target ID numbers are jumping around a little bit, on the beach I'm going to suggest you dig that. I mean, you mightn't dig that sort of signal at the park, but at the beach, if there's jewellery, if there's interesting finds and they're a bit deeper and they're in mineralised conditions, then the signals won't be crystal clear. If the target's quite shallow, they probably will be clear, but those deeper targets that can be really nice finds, often they're sketchy signals, so the signal's only repeatable 50% of the time and the target IDs might jump around a bit. So make sure you give those kinds of targets a bit of attention and dig them. The next zone to head for would be the wet sand. So that's the area between the high tide line and the low tide line. And this can be a pretty tricky area to detect, particularly for beginners, because really you do need more than just an entry-level metal detector to be able to cope with the difficult conditions. You have salt water and black sands, and they create mineralisation and a lot of interference for entry-level detectors, so you need a few features to be able to deal with that. So take that into account if you're starting out. Areas of interest here would include any signs of beach erosion, cuts in the beach after heavy seas and storms, also any low areas or depressions, and you can usually spot these because this is where you'll find clusters of shells and small pebbles and that kind of thing. Also around any structures such as piers and jetty pylons, steps again, any boat ramps, anything like that. Any structures around or near the water are always good places to head for. When you're hunting in wet sand, these conditions, as I mentioned in the video, are pretty tricky for entry-level detectors. So the thing to do with an entry-level detector, if it's giving you a lot of noise, is to reduce your sensitivity, and maybe then you will still be able to use it in the wet sand. If you have a detector like a Mine Lab Equinox machine or something similar, there will be different modes. Make sure you're using the best mode for wet sand. And with the Equinox machines, it's Beach 2 for the wet sand. Use Beach 1 for the dry. So hopefully you'll still be able to hunt the wet sand even with an entry-level detector if you drop that sensitivity. You can also detect in and under the water. This is obviously a whole lot trickier than in the wet or the dry sand because you're going to need specialised waterproof equipment to do that. You can wade or you can dive. So for diving you obviously need quite a bit of equipment to do that successfully. With wading you're going to need a sand scoop and a long handle and waterproof equipment, headphones and detector of course. You're looking for troughs, gutters and depressions where heavy targets like coins and jewellery might settle and get stuck during the in and outgoing tides. You're looking for swimming zones between the flags, areas where people congregate when they're swimming, safe zones for swimming. You're looking generally for popular areas in the water, and that might be in the shallows, in a particular area where there are sandbars away from rips and that kind of thing. You really need to do your research for searching in the water to see where people are congregating, where they're getting concentrated, and that's where you want to spend your time.
The next tip I've got for you guys is to scan targets from different angles. So if you get a target that's a little bit average, sounds horrible, the numbers are jumping wildly, it's not repeatable, move around the target and approach it from different angles, and you might find that you're getting a better signal, more stable target ID numbers, and that's likely because of the way the object's lying down in the sand. Could be on an angle, could be on its edge. It could be surrounded by other iron targets or other objects, and the signal might not sound that great from one direction, but it might sound better from a different direction, and then that'll just reinforce the idea that, yep, that's worth digging.
Around the rocks is also a really good place to search. I'd suggest here to use a small coil, like a 6-inch coil, just so you can get in and around the rocks more easily than using a large coil. You're looking at sandy sections against the rocky areas, adjacent the rocky areas and in amongst the rocky areas. You're also looking potentially under the smaller rocks. This is because the tides and storms will push objects around, they'll push them into the rocks, and they will get trapped there. So you definitely want to be spending some time in and around the rocks with a small coil, and you'll be rewarded.
Now this tip is one that I learnt the hard way. Make sure you dig low target ID signals. At the park and places like that, we tend to discriminate out low signals, like signals, for example, from 0 to 10, let's say, on the Minelab Equinox, just to give you a bit of a reference, as this is a pretty common detector. What you need to be aware of is that gold rings up very low, and the more pure the gold, so 24 karat gold for example, will ring up low. It sounds a bit like iron, so signals from rings, small rings, chains, gold objects like that, they can be almost down near 0. Rings will typically be 6, 7, 8 and above, but chains can be right down near 0. So dig the low target IDs, because they can be the best signals of all.
Up against the sand dunes is also a very good place to go, particularly after heavy seas and high tides. Look for erosion zones, look for areas where seaweed's been pushed up into the dunes or up against the dunes, because that's a sign that there's been heavy seas, and if that's happened then there's a good chance that other objects like coins and jewellery and such have been pushed up against the dunes. So definitely worth a look hard up against the sand dunes.
Another thing that I've learnt with a bit of beach detecting is that as you're trying to recover a target, sometimes you might lose the target completely, or you'll have trouble finding it. What I'd suggest here is to move the sand around. So if you're digging a hole and you have a bit of an idea of where the target is, but all of a sudden you can't hear it anymore, dig some more sand out, move the sand around, spread it out, and you'll often find that you'll hear the target again. And that's probably just because you've moved the target that's on its edge, and you can't hear it. So move the sand around and you'll hear it again.
One of the techniques I like to use when I'm metal detecting on the beach is called gridding. You can use this anywhere, but it's particularly useful on the beach because you can easily mark where you've been. I use this technique if I'm searching for a lost item on the beach, but I'll also use it if I start to find 2 or 3 targets in close proximity. This might mean that there's a bit of a concentration of targets, and then I might mark off a 10 by 10 metre area and I'll grid it up and down, or across ways, overlapping each time I go across, and marking my trail as I go with either my foot or my sand scoop behind me. But don't dismiss gridding, it's a very good tool to use in certain areas of the beach where you know there's been a lot of activity or where you're finding quite a few targets. Beach protocol I think is an important thing to have a chat about. Look, always fill in your holes, doesn't matter whether they're in the dry sand or the wet sand, it's just a good thing to do. It's just a safe thing to do. It stops other people from hurting themselves if they should fall into that hole or twist their ankle or something. Take your rubbish with you. Anything you dig that's rubbish or any rubbish you find on the surface, I always take it with me. It just again leaves a good impression. Respect people's personal space. There's no need to detect right up next to people. Come back when the beach isn't so busy if there's an area where there's a lot of people. In general though, just have fun, be friendly, be kind to people's dogs as they run past, that kind of stuff. It just again leaves a good impression and helps other detectorists in the hobby and helps people out there have a positive impression of detectorists at the beach.
My last tip for you guys might seem obvious, but I sometimes even forget to do this. There's a skid plate on the coil on most detectors, so a plastic plate that snaps onto the bottom of your coil. Make sure you take that off and clean that coil with fresh water, because sand will get trapped under that plate and it'll affect your detector. It'll cause interference and you'll end up with erratic behaviour. So make sure you take the skid plate off, clean the coil with fresh water, and make sure you clean everything else with fresh water as well, because you don't want it to corrode and rust. And that's it.
Obviously you're going to need some tools and equipment to go detecting at the beach, and you could argue that this is where you really do need waterproof equipment, waterproof detector. Slightly more advanced detectors are going to give you much better success, because you'll be able to handle the salt water conditions and the black sands and the mineralisation. So you do want to consider getting a decent detector if you're going to spend a lot of time at the beach, or particularly in the water. You want a pinpointer. That'll make it quick and easy for you to find your target. A hand spade of some sort. A sand scoop is definitely needed if you're in the water or in the wet sand, I think. Not so much of an important item when you're on the dry sand. You'll need a fines bag, you need a rubbish bag, and I personally think you'll need headphones just to make it easier to hear your targets and sounds with the surf in the background. So there's a few ideas regarding beach detecting, places to head, what to do, the kind of equipment you might need, and just a few ideas that I'm hoping will help you guys out. So all the best with your hunting at the beach. It's a great place to spend some time, even if you don't find anything. It's just good to get out and get some fresh air and enjoy your local beaches. Good luck out there, guys. Happy hunting, and I'll catch you on the next video.